Right. Or even just Adrian or Stella, you know, it could just be one name. What about names? Speaking of which, names of characters.
Names are an interesting thing. I think everybody comes up with names in a different way. The problem with me for names is there's too many names. So it's like people go, well, I get my names from the phone book. And it's like, dude, look through all those names, man. How do I choose one over another? And so what I was trying to do is figure out a palette, let's say, of names. So my palette of names ends up being something where I will decide, I did a terrible movie that got released by Lionsgate, so maybe it's not all that terrible, called Crooked, but nobody should ever see it. It's really bad. It's nothing like my script either. It's like one of the few movies that I've seen where it's like, that's not even my idea. What happened? And I'm the only screenwriter credited on it. But everything changed. But the thing with that movie was, I decided I was going to use the names of screenwriters of film noir movies. So I made this gigantic list, because, you know, we're dealing with hundreds and hundreds of movies, and so you have hundreds of names, and then you look at the names and go, this name fits that character, this name fits that character, and basically by creating a palette, you know, instead of going through the whole phone book. But sometimes you collect names. So I watched a news story once where something happened to them, they were robbed or whatever, but their name was Darkway. D-A-R-Q-U-A.
Oh, that's good.
And I'm like, Darkway's an awesome name, man. So that goes like, you know, you put it in a notebook, Darkway, sometime that name's gonna come out. And sometimes you hear names where you go, that is an amazing name. The thing about names is hard sounds and soft sounds and multiple syllables gives you different ideas of who the characters are. So if a character has hard sounds in their names, that makes them a harder character than somebody with soft sounds in their names. If you have a villain, I like to have villains' henchmen's names end with S because it's a hiss, an automatic hiss at the end. But multiple syllables sometimes, again, this gets into trying out names verbally, because if somebody's going to be calling a character by name, it's got to sound good coming out of somebody's mouth, which kind of, by the way, gets into dialogue. Dialogue often needs to play on screen. So some lines of dialogue work perfect on the page, but when you say them out loud, have a different meaning. So, and this is like the accidental pun. So if you have two guys discussing a bank robbery in a men's room, and one guy says, you know, you're in, it suddenly has a totally different meaning because they're in a men's room and somebody says urine. And so you want to look for those things and basically look how dialogue sounds. Oh man, this is a tale out of school, but here it goes anyway. The first script that I sold to Paramount Pictures, I had a development executive that wanted a character. I had a character that said it's dangerous, and she wanted to change the line of dialogue to it's risky. And that sounds right, except when you say risky, you smile. Sort of. There's a smile sound to risky. And so when a character says it's risky and they smile, it doesn't become dangerous. It now becomes, it's risky, but I'm up for it. Instead of it's dangerous and I could die. So sometimes words, words, when you look at yourself in the mirror, when you say the words, your face comes up with an expression that's the opposite of what you meant. And that can work for you or against you, depending upon whether you know what that opposite thing is. You can have a character say, that sounds risky to me. And it's got that smile sound in it where that's too dangerous.
Character names that describe the archetype of the character. And let's say there's a lot of female characters these days that are supposed to be sort of these cool girls that have men's names. So it makes them sort of...
Archetype thing, here's the thing, you don't want, Darkway is a good character name because it sounds real. You don't want to have these names like, I'm trying to think of, Face Off has some of the worst character names ever, because the characters are all named after Greek whatever, so you have, Castor Troy, and they don't sound real. They sound like somebody went through the Greek mythology book and said, hey, here's a name, here's a name, here's a name. So you don't want to do that. You also don't want to have names that are too on the nose for characters where it describes, their actual name describes who the character is. You don't want that. Instead, what you want are maybe the things that are like a couple of generations removed from that. So the audience doesn't necessarily, if that's how you're coming up with character names. The audience doesn't necessarily jump from, I can't think of a good example right now, only because I'm not wired to come up with these on the nose names, but there's I wish I had an example, damn it. But the names, the tomboy names like Sam and things like that. Here's the sometimes problem with character names is you can come up with a character name that sounds good, but when you read it on paper, we suddenly see a different person. And so I have a script that's Fantastic Voyage in a computer, which probably could never be made now because our computers are all so small. It's Fantastic Voyage in an iPhone. But the idea was I have 5 scientists and 5 badass Marines go through virtual reality inside a computer to deal with a virus that gets way out of hand. But the problem was the scientists were all doctor this, doctor this, doctor this. The military, the Marines, were all whatever their rank was, except I came up with Sergeant Burton with one problem. Sergeant Burton was a woman. So when you read it, you never think it's a woman. And she lost her sex by the name. So I thought I can't have her be Sergeant Burton because when you're reading it on the page, you don't see that she's a woman, and nobody's going to flip back and go, is this a guy or a gal? It's never going to happen. So I thought I need to come up with a name that's better, and her first name was Betsy. So she became Sergeant Betsy. And again, when you do that change, suddenly the character changes. So Sergeant Betsy went from being the badass female Marine to being the badass cheerleader female Marine. Because Betsy has kind of this weird sort of for me at least, a cheerleader type connotation. And I made her the spunky, upbeat, badass Marine. And so now Sergeant Betsy went through there and her character kind of changed once that name came on there. But it's easy to, when a character just becomes the character slug, when they stop being the description, get the description, on page 1, and now we're on page 40. You're not going to remember who that description is, so their name has to have something that reminds us who that character is. In a case, in the badass Marines, it's great to have the character name, again, hard sound character names, because they're the badass scientist, more syllables and less hard sounds for the scientists. So we sort of get the idea that the scientists are less, macho, even though, whatever.
Well, going back to Betsy, I feel like she would either have been born in the 50s, 60s, or 70s because I heard that name from those eras.
Yeah.
Whereas if she was maybe a millennial or even after, it would be Sam.
Yeah.
Or it would be...
But you see, the thing is, Sam desexes the character. Whereas, if she's Samantha, that can work. But
That's true.
Once we say Sam, it desexes the character. And so what happens is you're on page 40 and you read Sam and suddenly in your mind you go, it's a dude. And then Sam's making out with Ben and you're going, okay, it's, that can confuse the reader. So the thing to always do is to always look for what could confuse the reader. And if you're thinking about, we have this, this fantasy that someone's going to read our script with care. And what's happening is in the old days, there used to be freelance readers that got paid $35 to $50 a script. And in order to pay rent in Los Angeles, that meant they were taking home stacks of scripts a day and just shoo. They have to read the whole script because they have to write up a coverage report. But at the same time, that doesn't mean they're going to read every word. They're going to do a lot of skimming. And that leads to confusion if you have those ambiguous names like Sam sometimes. So that's one of those things that could be a problem. But the problem now is those were the good old days when they got paid $35 to $50 a day. Now they're unpaid interns who get paid nothing and are reading your script. And so they put in no dollars worth of care for your script, which means your script really has to jump off the page and get them. But
they're posting status updates too while they're reading.
Yeah, absolutely. A friend of mine posts worst lines he read in a script today. And I'm not going to give you his name, but
okay, interesting.
But they're awful lines. You just go, somebody typed that? It got from the brain through the fingers onto the keyboard into the laptop?